What explains the latest round of escalation in the Middle East? What is patently obvious is that the two key power centers in the Middle East, that is, the United States and Iran, both are not keen on an escalation. Both have been doing their level best to avoid an escalation. The United States has been putting a lot of pressure on its protege Israel to wind up its operations quickly and get it out of this assorted logjam. The Iranians have been trying to control their three edges, the Hamas, the Houthis, and the Hezbollah, but their level of leverage with them has reduced drastically since General Soleimani was killed. That was a double edged sword. I mean, the Americans did manage to knock out Soleimani by a drone strike, but that has had repercussions in the dilution of Iran's control over its axis of resistance, so called. So, when there is this clear desire to avoid escalation, and from the United States, it stems primarily from the fear that the Chinese would try and exploit any escalation in the Middle East, coupled with what is happening in Ukraine, to try and carry out operations, pre-pone operations in Taiwan. We have been seeing the level of Chinese naval aggression against the Philippines take dramatic surges. And there is a speculation that China might feel that the time is most opportune for it to try and retake Taiwan. The standard timeline expected for that was 2025 to 2027, when the Chinese were expected to make their bid to retake Taiwan, but that may be preponed to this year. Seeing the level to which the United States is bogged down in Ukraine, in Europe, and in the Middle East, they may just think the time is opportune and make a desperate gamble to make a quick dash and try and either capture Taiwan or to at least enforce a blockade which would from their side unfreeze the situation, which could otherwise simmer on for decades. The Americans are desperately keen to avoid entanglement in the Middle East. If the flare up takes place with Iran, could tie up 2 to 3 and even more carrier battle groups, a significant amount of combat aviation in the Middle East, which would be at the cost of facing the Chinese threat. The Chinese Navy is today the world's largest navy and a very potent force. So is the Chinese Air Force. And the Chinese have invested heavily in rockets, missiles, and drones. Heavy investments they have been making, which could make a very effective effort at making a land grab in Taiwan, seeing what has happened in Ukraine and Middle East, or otherwise initiating a conflict even with the Philippines, which could ultimately end up with the crisis in Taiwan. So the Americans are keen that they do not want to divert resources towards the Middle East, and it is to that extent they were pressing Israel to quickly wind up its operations and to go in for a ceasefire, and then as an end state solution go in for a two-state solution. The Americans are keen to enforce that, to be seen as even-handed in the Middle East and not lose the support of all their Arab protege states. The simple fact is that no Arab state is openly taking a stand against Israel. It is the Iran proxies, the so-called axis of resistance, which have been through the Houthis, Hezbollah, and of course the Hamas, which are the main protagonists of this war, who have been very, very active and bellicose against Israel. So, despite this wish for restraint between the principal actors in terms of the United States and Iran, what explains the latest round of escalation in the Middle East? There have been 12 rounds of air attacks by the America United Kingdom combined. The American F-18 Hornets and even B-1 bomber from continental United States have been involved in major air strikes against the Syrian and Iraqi Shia factions who have been attacking, who have launched over 160 drone attacks and other kind of standoff flyers against the American bases in Iraq and Syria. Against them there have been 12 rounds of air strikes, and the last one they were about 85 target struck in Iraq and Syria, and they were about 36 targets heavily pounded in Houthi targets pounded in Yemen. And then there was a little tactical pause, kind of a take, and the Americans had said these are the not last of the air strikes. They would wait and watch and then respond, escalate as required. They were not keen to escalate, but if it called for an escalation because the empire has to take revenge in case troops are hit, and so blatantly. So if they are to assert their dominance and their power, they have to hit back. They have hit back, but they did not hit back. In Iran proper, though the Republican faction, the Republicans in the United States have been asking for strikes against Iran, which they feel is the prime mover behind the three edges and the Shia militias in Iraq and Syria. But Joe Biden has been very, very cautious and conservative, and he has decided not to escalate into Iran till now. Will that change with the latest provocations? Once again, US bases in Syria and Iraq have been hit. The Houthis have attacked an American flag container ship and caused serious damage. So, what explains this escalation? Why this escalation when there is such a palpable rationale for restraint on both sides? I think it has a lot to do with the back channel diplomacy, diplomatic efforts that were taking place, midwifed by Qatar and possibly the Egyptian intelligence between Israel, the United States, and the Hamas to go in for a ceasefire, and possibly a ceasefire for as long as 6 months, as per the speculation of some sections on television. 6 months of a ceasefire, release of the hostages, all the Israeli hostages that was being openly talked of. But that seems to have broken down completely. And it is thereafter that Israel has gone in for a major offensive into Rafah, which is just on the Egyptian border, sending palpable waves of concern in Egypt, which has been making threatening noises that it will be compelled to do something if the battle comes too close to it for comfort. But when the Israelis have escalated in the Rafah, because I understand that they had some intelligence of the present location of the hostages. They did mount a major raid and they have been able to rescue but just two hostages. So either the bulk of the hostages were taken out from there or wherever they were hidden, and the Israelis are making a desperate bid to sort of put pressure to do that. And when the Israelis upped the ante, the Shia militias in Iraq and Syria have been felt compelled to retaliate, and so did the Houthis felt compelled to escalate. So far, we have seen both sides keep a lid down. So the fact is that it is the Israeli raids in Rafah which seem to have prompted the Houthis' decision and the decision of the Shia militias in Iraq and Syria to step up the ante in retaliation and try and send a message that Israel now must stop its offensive against the Hamas for negotiations and a two-state solution to go through. I am not very clear as to whether that end state will ever be realized. Israel seems to be dead set against the two-state solution. The simple fact is that the Orthodox Jews, who were 12% of the Israeli population, have now reached the figure of 32%. And that is why you will find that any government that comes in Tel Aviv will perforce be very strongly right wing and represent the Jewish Orthodox lobby, which is dead set against this two-state solution. It is difficult to see how it will really actualize, how much pressure the United States is able to put on Iran. There is that single state solution which is a non-starter from the word go. That means Israel looks after the Palestinians. I don't think the Palestinians are ever going to accept it. There is the three-state solution that is being talked of, that Egypt and Jordan step in, the West Bank goes to Jordan, Gaza goes back to Egypt, and therefore it is not a two-state but a three-state solution that kind of comes up. It is difficult to see any one of these really fructifying because that alone can lead to a logical end state to this conflict, termination of conflict. Otherwise, after a few months, I would not be the least surprised of this flare up again. The Hamas are quite keen to show that they are down but not out. And even during this entire very massive Israeli air bombardment followed by ground strikes and ground invasion, they have been trying to let off salvos of rockets, and the next salvo of rockets could restart the whole thing a few months down the line. Even if a ceasefire take place, the dangerous escalation would be if the Hezbollah gets involved, and the most dangerous would be if Iran is also targeted, and then it lets loose its arsenal of missiles, tactical ballistic missiles, cruise missiles and others. It can do a lot of damage. It may take a bad hit, it may suffer greatly, But the fact is that the American establishment does not have the resources to fight so many wars together. As it is, the aid to Ukraine is in a log jam, and the Americans are now telling Europeans to do the heavy lifting because the American Congress, the Republican Congress, has stopped all aid to Israel, all aid to Ukraine, made it contingent on what happened on the Mexican border, strengthening that. So politically there is a log jam in the United States. Unfortunately, the American secretary has been hospitalized again for the second time. Things are not looking good, and we have gotten into a mess in the Middle East, to which we are not able to see an end in sight. Strategic logic dictates that America placate the situation, cool it down as early as possible, because the meteorological window of opportunity for China, the first window of opportunity when the bad conditions, tight conditions are right for operations against Taiwan in April, May, the next comes in August. These could easily see a flare up in Taiwan, and that could lead to a direct clash between the United States and China, which will put in the shade all these conflicts. I think the Chinese appear to have come to a conclusion that this is their best in terms of timing when America is totally bogged down. Therefore, America is trying to see that it does not get bogged down in the Middle East, because Ukraine so far has been very careful not to give weapon systems which would detract from their operational capability against China. For example, they gave the HIMARS, the shorter range ones, but not the tactical ballistic component of the HIMARS, which is 300 plus kilometer range, which would be required by them in the Philippines, required by them in the Japanese chain of islands, required to take on the Chinese Navy. They have not partnered with those weapon systems. They have been very, very careful to see that they do not weaken their capability against China while aiding Ukraine. But if the Middle Eastern involvement goes out of control, that is, escalates exponentially, then American military capability will not suffice to deal with multiple flashpoints at the same time. They are having problems in terms of ammunition production. Their ammunition supply to Ukraine has ceased. They are asking the NATO counterparts to now do the heavy lifting. As far as Ukraine is concerned, the Ukraine army is in serious trouble. Their Zelensky has sacked Zaluzny, the General Zaluzny, the very popular military commander. The man who has taken his place, the number 2 land forces commander, is rather unpopular. He was in Bakhmut. There he launched a number of failed attacks, offensives. He doesn't have a tradition of success behind him, and he is now the chief. He is more politically pliable. Things are in a bad shape in Ukraine. The manpower is scraping the bottom of the barrel. So the America is trying to pivot from Europe back to China. It should not have gone to Ukraine in the first place. All strategic thinkers, starting from Henry Kissinger to John Mearsheimer, were warning America against this imperial overstretch and overreach. Unfortunately, that has happened. That can't be undone. Now, all that America can do is to try and avoid serious engagement in the Middle East, because that would detract in a very meaningful manner, militarily debilitate its response. If China decides to up the ante in Taiwan, in Philippines and elsewhere. So despite all the wishes for preventing escalation, we have seen an escalation taking place in the Middle East, and it is to be hoped that cooler heads will prevail and it will not spiral out of control. It can even spiral out of control with an accident. Thank you.